everyone, welcome back to Love, Dating and Marriage Relationships with me, where we share ask and answer relationship questions to help you and I build a loving, godly, healthy and long-lasting relationship. I hope everyone's having a rather good start, albeit a bit different to the new year. I mean, it is still January. So the question for today's video is arguing in your relationship inevitable? Can you resolve conflict or disagreements in your relationship without arguing? Well, let's find out together. Keep watching. So for the purpose of this video, by conflict, I mean serious disagreement. Now, couples generally have conflict or serious disagreements in every 4 seasons of marriage. And by 4 seasons, I mean spring, summer, autumn, and winter. But what you normally find is that unresolved conflict usually creates a sense of hopelessness between couples, and it sort of leaves them with only 2 options. The first option is to remain in the marriage, endure whatever it is that is going on, and be miserable. The second option is to dissolve the marriage, hoping that somewhere in the future they would find someone else with whom they are more compatible. But the truth is, a lot of couples fail to realize that there is no marriage without some form of conflict. There is no marriage without some form of serious disagreement. Now, although a loving relationship is fostered by a lot of things, it is certainly not fostered by winning arguments. So, what is so bad about arguing? To argue is an act or a word that is very well known in the legal arena. So this is where lawyers present arguments to show whether someone is guilty or not. And the purpose for this act is always clear, that any reasonable, sane and mature person would agree with your argument, would agree with your point of view. So when you choose to argue with your spouse, it's almost like you set up a battle, and at the end of that battle, there has to be a winner and a loser. The first problem with arguing is that it can quickly become charged with negative emotions, and you end up changing the tone of your voice. There's yelling, there's blame, there's screaming, there's crying, there are threats, and you also, pour out words that begin to assassinate your spouse's character. Arguing communicates condemnation, and it always strikes at the other person's self-esteem, which then creates disunity. Interestingly, this is a very common experience, but it is rarely a pretty picture. The other problem with argument is that any victory won by means of an argument is usually short-lived. What you find is that the other person who was the loser of that argument will come back at a later time, either with a fresh argument or a rehashed argument, because they're trying to find satisfaction. So you see, argument does not in any way solve conflict. Instead, it only reveals unresolved conflict. It never resolves your disagreement or whatever differences you have with each other. It only reveals the unresolved disagreement or the unresolved conflict. So how do you resolve conflict without arguing? 1. Conflict resolution requires listening. Normally, when you argue, you somehow believe that you are listening to what the other person is saying, when in actual fact, you're either interjecting all the time or you're just reloading your own verbal response or your verbal guns. So instead of focusing on your response to what the other person is saying, instead focus on hearing what they are actually saying, because then this can help guide your thoughts better on how to respond. So when you listen and you get a chance to respond, it is important that you affirm the importance of your relationship. Now, you affirm the importance of your relationship by saying things like, I know you're upset because this is what this situation means to our relationship. This is what it means to both of us. Now, after affirming the importance of your relationship, you also have to clarify what the other person is saying. If you find yourself assuming anything, do not hold those assumptions as facts. Clarify those assumptions as well while you can. And then finally, only share your own ideas or your perspective or your opinion when your spouse feels understood. Because chances are, if your spouse doesn't feel understood and you decide to share your own, opinions or your ideas, it is possible that that could create more problems. So if I don't feel understood and then you decide to share your own ideas or you share your own opinions, the chances are you may say something totally different from what we're talking about. And then I go, that's not even the point I was trying to make. And it goes on and on and on. So the second point on how to resolve conflicts without arguing is that listening leads to understanding. Now, a lot of couples spend more time arguing about their differences, arguing about a disagreement, than spending time resolving that disagreement. And that's because they haven't gotten to a point where they actually understand each other's point of view. So how can listening lead to understanding for you? So the first point is knowing what your spouse is really saying. Now, this is one of the most common mistakes a lot of couples make, responding to what they think their spouse is saying, as opposed to listening to what is actually being said. Now, I hold my hand up and say, I have been guilty of this several times. So I always have to make the conscious effort to respond to what is actually being said and not what I think I'm hearing or not what I think, my husband has said. So making that conscious effort to respond to what your spouse is really saying is very important. You also have to try to hear your spouse's feelings. You have to try to discover what is truly important to your spouse with regards to that situation. And then you also have to determine how strongly your spouse feels about that situation. Now remember that understanding comes from listening and asking clarifying questions. So the third point is that understanding leads to resolutions, and resolutions, of course, lead to harmony. Now, resolutions can normally fall into three different kinds of categories. So there's the meeting in the middle, meeting at the other end, or meeting at a later date. This is where, of course, we agree to disagree out of respect and love for each other. Now, with these categories, they could be permanent or temporary depending on the nature of the disagreement. So an example of a more permanent resolution could be, okay, I don't like the way you handle the toothpaste from the bottom of the tube, or I don't like the way you handle the toothpaste from the top of the tube. So we could choose to meet in the middle, and then we decide to each get a separate toothpaste that we would use. So that would be a more meeting in the middle type permanent example. So I'm sure you'd want to find out why it is important to resolve conflict. Now, we have conflict, we have disagreements simply because of our differences. But the answer to resolving conflict is not in seeking to rid ourselves of our differences, but rather in learning to make our differences into assets rather than liabilities. Understand that resolved conflicts enable you and your spouse to work together as a team, utilizing your differences to make life better for both of you. And of course, it is important to resolve conflicts because you do not want your home to become a battlefield where the husband and wife are enemies. You don't want that. So to sum it up, marital conflicts, marital disagreements are inevitable, but arguing is an option, an unhealthy option. But the truth is, every couple have disagreements, every couple has conflict, and conflict resolution is not always easy because we are egocentric. We want to believe that we are right and that every sane, mature, and reasonable person would agree with our opinions. And amongst all the other things I've mentioned, it is important that you maintain the attitude of love, respect, and togetherness with your spouse, because your attitude can be the determining difference between arguing, resolving a conflict, or resolving a serious disagreement. Right, okay, so thank you so much for watching. I trust that this has been useful to you. And if you'd like to get more tips on how to resolve conflict, resolve serious disagreements without arguing, then I encourage you to get a copy of this book titled Everybody Wins by one of my all-time favorite authors, Dr. Gary Chapman. I'm sure it will be a blessing to you. Also, let me know in the comment section how you like to resolve conflict, how you prefer to resolve serious disagreements without arguing. And until next time, I encourage you to live an intentional life. Stay blessed.